Writing teachers. So I want to give you guys an idea on how you can launch your small moments unit of study. And this is also the same thing as narrative, but our little kids don't always have lots of ideas. That is a lot of background knowledge that they have experienced in life. So sometimes we have to pull out those really small moments for them. One of the ways you can do this is by a planned scene that you do in your classroom. It could be anything, but something that you want to remember and you're like, oh my gosh, remember when Miss Moore did this and it was so silly, and that's a small moment that I could write about. So one of my favorites that I learned a few years ago that is a really great one to model for that very first launching of a small moment unit of study is to do the marker story. So have your kids on the carpet all settled around. And then one thing you can do is and this doesn't, you don't even have to do this. You could just make it up and pretend like it happened in another classroom. And this is how I would go. Oh my gosh, students, you will not even begin to believe what just happened. While you guys were at recess or library or whatever, I had to go take a bucket of markers to Mrs. So-and-so. And when I went in there, all of her kids were sitting down and they were being such quiet listeners. And when I was walking over to take those markers to her, oh gosh, those markers just went everywhere and they fell on the kids' heads and they were ducking and covering. And I was so embarrassed. I couldn't even believe it. I couldn't even say anything. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I spilled all my markers on you. Meanwhile, all the kids started laughing because they thought it was hilarious. But I know that I was totally mortified. But all those kids helped me pick up all those markers and put them right back in the bucket. And I passed it off to the teacher and walked out going, oh my word, I can't believe I just did this. So that is the whole story. That's it. It's really short. It's really tiny. But what we want to have in it is we want to have some talking. We want to have some movement. We want to have some feeling, like how I was feeling on the inside, and we want it to be short. So I totally made this up. This never really happened. Doesn't even have to happen for you. We could have all the teachers in the district all have the same marker story. It doesn't really matter. The point is that you want to have something small that you can tell to your students and be really animated in doing so. And then when it's time for you to go about and plan your piece of writing with your students, we're going to do something called touch and tell, or touching the pages to plan. And so to do this, you might have, so if this were my blank booklet right here, I would say, oh my gosh, guys, I want to tell this story about the other day when I dropped all those markers. Remember how I told you that story? I was so embarrassed. So one of the things that good writers do is they've got to tell their story in order so that their reader can understand it. And we want to be able to tell them all these great things. And to do that, we can do something called touching our pages to plan. And then once I've done that, I can go back and do a quick sketch. Now, teachers, if you need an example of a difference between a sketch and an illustration, or a sketch and a drawing, I have an anchor chart that I've made for you, and I will make sure that that is in there for you to see that there are times that we as writers, especially young writers, they need time and practice by sketching to get their ideas down. They are not mature enough to be able to use a big long graphic organizer. They shouldn't have to do a draft and then recopy ever. And this is one of those things to where we want them to get started right away. And the way to do that is to teach them to touch their pages to plan, to sketch as they write. Some kids like to write and then sketch, and that's okay. But a lot of our writers need help. So I would model and I would say, okay, guys, this would be my front title page. But if I was going to start, I would be like, I was going over to Miss Davis's room to take her some markers to borrow. When I walked into the room, all the kids were sitting so quietly on the carpet. They were getting ready to learn as I thought I would sneak over and hand Miss Davis the markers. But uh-oh, I tripped over a book that was on the ground. And I went flying, and the markers went flying. They flew all up in the air and all over the kids' heads. So you see how all I'm doing is I'm telling my story as I turn the pages. Number one, using booklets. It helps make your writing longer for the students, and it helps them to make it more complete and to tell it like a story than it would be to write on a single sheet of paper, especially a piece of notebook paper. It doesn't feel special, but a stapled set of papers feels special somehow. So be aware of that. Another thing, if you are wanting to take a risk with me this year, one of the best things you can ever do is to give your students, oh my goodness, I don't have it ready, black flare pens. Black flare pens just for Writer's Workshop. It doesn't bleed through. It lets you see exactly where they're doing their revision and editing. It also slows them down because there's the drag on the paper for when they're writing. But I'm telling you, it will help them actually kind of slow down a little bit, and you get to see all of their thinking. I know you're thinking they're going to lose them, but if you make it really special and they only get the one, then I promise you they will keep up with them. But there are some really great benefits to using flare pens with writers. So teachers, I hope this gave you a great idea on how you could get started with one of those very first lessons. Actually, it's the first couple of lessons because you're modeling, telling that story, you're getting ready right away. And on day one of that unit, after you guys have revisited some of the great text that you've read, this is a place where you can immediately tell them the story, model telling it across your pages. You could even model sketching one of the very beginning pictures, and then you encourage your students to go get started right away in their booklet, touching their pages to plan, turning and talking to a partner before they go. But it does give them an opportunity to get started writing those small moment stories because they're going to have lots and lots of them to write.